Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of our Fall 2023 series of Tuesday Times Roundtable, Agents of Change on Both Sides of the Prison Fence, Letter Exchange Programs as Intercultural Learning. My name is Michelle Zaldivar, your Senior Program Coordinator here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives. TTR is our flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends. You can learn more about TTR, watch past recordings, or come back and reference this one at go.fiu.edu/TTR. As we engage in today's session, we ask that everyone please use the mics. We'll have roaming mics for the audience, so whenever we do get some Q&A or some feedback or some discussion, please hold a second for those mics. We'll have them roaming around. If you haven't already, please take a moment to sign in. This QR code, which is also posted around the room and up on the board, is your form to sign in. This is where we'll report back attendance for any of the things that you're doing, whether you're here for honors college credit or extra credit from a GL professor, or just want to get that back on Panther Connect for your engagement points in the university. This is where we'll capture that. If you have any questions about TTR or any of the other programming that we offer for undergraduate students, especially at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, please feel free to either check out our website, goglobal.fiu.edu/students, or hang out after today's session. Myself and our graduate assistants that you met out in the foyer will be glad to answer your questions. TTR is always grounded in a global issue and trend and is always linked to an article where you can learn more. You can read the article for today's session at go.fiu.edu/TTR1010. So that's today's date, right? So October 10th, 1010. You can read the article for this week's session there. FIU provides anyone with an @fiu.edu email address free digital access to the New York Times. So if you haven't already, you can go ahead and activate that subscription at accessnyt.com. Our session today is a panel of facilitators and participants of Exchange for Change, an educational and communication skills program that empowers students to become, and I'm quoting from their website here, agents of social change across different communities in ways they may otherwise never have encountered, through the power of the paper and pen. Leading our panel today is Tania Lopez. She is an associate teaching professor of writing and rhetoric here at FIU and an Exchange for Change facilitator. As a volunteer facilitator with Exchange for Change, she has taught writing as social action and writing about the exile experience at the Homestead Correctional. She's also facilitated a letter exchange during fall 2022 here between FIU students and incarcerated students. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to all of our panelists who will take a moment to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I see a lot of known faces and faces I don't know, and I'm really happy to be here because it gives us an opportunity to give some visibility to this program that we all believe so strongly in. I don't want to take too much time. I don't think we can do the go around the room because there's a lot of people. But I think one of the things that was not in that introduction, and I think you should know about me because it led me on this path, is that I was born and raised in Cuba. And although I've never been incarcerated, I do know what it's like to live in a prison nation, in a prison state. So because of Nick, who's here today, who facilitated one time an exchange between instructors teaching classes at FIU and instructors teaching classes at it was at Everglades Correctional?
Yep. No, it was at Dade
Correctional. I started getting familiar with the program, and I realized from today's talk that it is definitely an intercultural exchange. Because whenever I visit the prison, I've been teaching at Homestead Correctional, which is a women's prison in Florida City. So just a drive alone, it's like driving out of state almost. But whenever you come inside, it feels like you're visiting a foreign country because it's got its own culture, its own language, its own rules. And it feels very much like going back to Cuba because there's very limited freedom of speech. You have to go through customs. You can't bring technology. You can't bring your cell phones. You cannot bring your smartphones. If you bring anything in writing, they can review what they want to review. So I've come in with, let's say, feedback that I've written for students inside, and they'll sometimes look at it and read it. So I always have to tell the students, if you give me something to read and give you feedback on, just make sure that you don't give me anything that you wouldn't want the correction officers to read. So every time I visit a prison, it feels a little bit like going back to the home I left because of the limited freedom of speech and freedom that I experienced there. And today we want to explore those questions of what is education a privilege or is it a right? Does everybody have the right to an education? what can letter exchanges like this do for intercultural communication, but also for humanity in general? And I'll give it to Kathie. Kathie and Nick and Gissell and TT will introduce themselves. I always feel a little awkward introducing other people. They'll let you know what they want you to know. But I want them to have most of the time because I want you to know about this great program and what it can do, not just for our students, but also for the people inside. So Kathie, go ahead.
So, hi, my name's Kathie Klarreich. It's great to see, for me, mostly new faces. There are some people here who have been engaged in Exchange for Change, and thank you all for coming. You know who you are. So, I first went into the prison back in 2009. I went into a women's prison. Well, it wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I went in with the idea of teaching. I'd been a journalist, and I know the power of the written word. And as a journalist, you tell other people's stories. And it became very clear to me that it was important for people who are incarcerated to tell their own stories. I ended up leaving the country. I was in Haiti for a couple years, and when I came back, the people inside looked like they were doing the exact same thing they had done when I left. But of course, everybody evolves. And so we started a nonprofit because one class only reaches X number of students, but a nonprofit allows lots of people to reach lots of students. And the mission of Exchange for Change is really twofold. One is to go inside because we believe that education is a human right and provide the opportunity for people to have their own voice, to tell their own story in their own way rather than have the narrative be described by someone from the outside. And if you think about how incarcerated people are portrayed, very rarely will they say anything generous or kind, but rather about the crime that they committed and the harm that they caused. But actually there are faces, people, and lives behind each one of those stories. So the idea was, let's provide them an opportunity to be able to tell their own story. But then the second part of the mission is equally as important, which is to bring their voices out. Right? It's one thing for them to be able to tell their own story, but if nobody hears their own story, then it's kind of like we're preaching to the choir, right? Because they're talking inside the institution. Florida has the third highest incarcerated population in the country, and we're one of 17 countries that spends more money, states that spends exponentially more money on incarceration than on education, which is the topic that hopefully you read the New York Times piece. So our second part of our mission is to bring that voice out, which really speaks to what Tania was saying about the cultural differences. And we do it in a variety of ways, some of which I'll talk about later on. But I do want you to know that we have publications, and this is a major way that we get the voice out. Nick was the editor of Volume 3, example, and Tania and Gissell are editors of Volume 4, which is about to come out, and this is Volume 2. So that we present at the book fair, for example. We hold sessions like this. We invite you to come into the prison and hear the voices of the people behind, because we hold graduations at the prisons where we work. And we have prison visits, all of which I can talk about later. But there's ample opportunity, if you're so inspired, to be one of those agents of change, listen directly to the voice of the incarcerated, and then be the ambassador and take it back out to the world. So I'm going to pass it over to
Just a
Nick.
quick plug for the next upcoming volume. We're hoping to release it at the end of the year, or no?
No, like in 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Even better. But I'm really excited that, I don't know what that says about me about as a co-editor, but but I'm really excited that Professor Ana Menendez, who many of you I'm sure know, and is a personal hero of mine, has agreed and has written a wonderful foreword for the collection. So I'm really excited to start promoting that collection. Yeah.
My name is Nick Vagnoni. I'm a teaching professor here in the English department. And I first connected to Exchange for Change through Scott Cunningham at O Miami, another FIU alum, who put me in touch with Kathie, and he knew that I taught poetry classes as well. So I've taught poetry workshops in a couple different facilities here, state prisons, federal prisons. This summer I taught a poetry class at TGK, Turner Guilford Knight, Doral, which is interesting to think also that like several of these places are not far from here, right? In 15 minutes you could be at Everglades Correctional, you could be at traffic permitting. But just to know that not far from here these things are going on, right? You know, somebody's probably teaching a class at Everglades right now, right? So there's a bunch of guys in a classroom, not too different than this, doing a class on poetry or public speaking. And in addition to those classes, I've also facilitated a couple of exchanges, one of which was a letter exchange, and the other one was what Tania had alluded to before, which was a group of writing teachers here at FIU who, through FIU Center for the Advancement of Teaching, did a book group, essentially, and a letter exchange, basically like a pen pal sort of thing with a group of guys who were teaching their own classes in Dade Correctional Institution. So these are incarcerated teachers teaching their own classes, writing letters back and forth to teachers here at FIU. And so we had readings on best practices for teaching and dealing with things like imposter syndrome as a teacher and things like that. So it was really interesting as kind of like a cultural exchange there as well to see these two different kind of teaching environments mingle and contrast. And I can talk more about that as well as the Don't Shake the Spoon, which I think it's one thing to go into a class once a week. It's another thing to sit down with 30 or 40 pieces and really kind of transcribe them, read them again and again and again, you know, proofread them and all that. So that's sort of my role in the program. And I guess we can talk more about the articles as we go on. Yeah. Thanks.
So my name is Gissell del Castillo. I am a master's student here at FIU, graduating this semester. I first got introduced. Thanks. I always mention that because I never thought the day would come, right? But I first got introduced with Exchange for Change through a prison visit through one of my classes with Dr. Paul Feigenbaum. And I was taking a class on pedagogy, and he offered us the opportunity to go on a prison visit. And at the prison visit, I was just like, I need to get engaged with this organization in some way, shape, or form. I'm also a high school teacher during the day, and I realized that a lot of the students that I teach, their parents, their cousins, their uncles, their aunts, they're incarcerated, and they talk about it all the time. I teach at a Title I school in Broward, so a lot of my students are low income, and a lot of my students come from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it all was connected, and I was like, I need to help. And I've done a prison visit, I've gone inside, and I've taught a class over the summer as well. And I was also a student at one point who did the letter exchange. So I can talk about having firsthand experience with that as well.
Hi everyone, I'm DT and I'm a normal guy. I feel like everybody had all these cool titles. No, so I am a writer and a public speaker. I speak in regards to prison change and prison education as well as reform and reentry. Things along those lines. I came into contact with Exchange for Change because I am a former student of Exchange for Change. When I was 23, crazy thing happened in my life where I was arrested and falsely accused and wrongfully convicted for a crime I didn't commit. I was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and I spent the next 3.5 locked up for something I never did. Eventually, my appeal came through, and I was released, and I was able to get out a free man and everything. But while I was incarcerated, I found refuge, if you will, in programs like Exchange for Change to help me get through those days and through those difficult times. And I'm sure we'll go more into everything, but that's pretty much my story.
We kept joking that DT was the closer because nobody ever wants to follow DT because he's such a great speaker. So he kept saying, you're the closer, nobody's going to talk after you. And now he's always, you're done?
Well, I thought we were going to a whole thing. Right?
It's not over yet.
Introduction.
No, but we wanted to keep it really short because we wanted to do mostly Q&A. So this is the time when I want to invite all of you to share. I know I see a lot of people in the audience who have been a student in an exchange in my class when I taught the writing and social action. I'm really happy to see you here. I see other professors who have been to prison visits, Sean and I went to a visit, I saw Sean somewhere, where they actually took us on a tour of the dorms, and that was the most surreal thing I've ever done. But I think it was important that we did that, and I'm very happy that you were there with me that day. to see it as well. So yeah, just open it up for questions and any clarification if you want to hear more about anything that we've talked about. Do you have microphones that are going around? Okay.
Hello, hello. I just wanted to ask, if you're not in a class that is available to like do prison visits, how would you go about like visiting a prison regardless?
So we offer visits twice a week. Mondays is at the men's prison, which is really right down the street from here, and Wednesdays at the women's prison. And I think we're going to flash our website, but if you go onto our homepage, which is exchangeforchange-inbetween.org, click on the prison visit. All you have to do is sign up. We need a lag time for the men's prison of a little bit more than a week. The women's prison, I will be very honest, is more complicated. You have to go through a few more hoops to go to the women's prison. They're both extremely interesting, extremely different, but the opportunity is you go in, you meet one, well, we do, like everybody sits around the table, we do an icebreaker, then you break up into individual conversations for about an hour. The men's prison allows us to go on a tour, like Tania was saying. The women's prison does not, but I'll tell you the impact, and DT can talk about this, the impact of having people come in and volunteer their time to go and sit and have these one-on-one conversations impacts both sides, right? When's the last time you didn't have your cell phone for 4 hours, right? You actually are concentrating on the conversation with the person across from you, and everybody hates me when the hour is up because I have to go around and tell them we're going to come back to the table. The time goes that quickly. So it's easy to sign up, and you can do it on our website.
The graduations too.
Yeah. End of semester, we offer the opportunity for community people to come in and hear a performance done by our students. Actually, it's so popular, they have to audition inside. DT was our closer, both times he was at our graduations. And we can usually bring dozens of people inside if you're interested. We'll also post those dates up on our website. They'll be in December. So the Frederick Douglass Project is
The prison visit.
the prison visit, yeah.
I don't see that here.
If
I
you
wish
go
I could-
down on our website, like on the homepage, it'll say visit a prison. But anyway, if you go onto our page, you'll find it. It's-
I don't know what I'm
it's all
doing.
there. Yeah.
I can't see.
Don't worry about it.
And the
Anna will
difference
do it.
of both is that I feel like with the prison visit, you are sitting right across the table from somebody.
I can't-
Whereas with the graduation, you are an audience member, sort of in a classroom, very different classroom like this, but still in a place like this where you have a stage and people go on there and they perform their pieces. So with the prison visits, it's a little bit more direct, and you are able to ask questions and you are able to have that connection with one person.
Those are really well facilitated too. Like even as a teacher, like I would go in and I would have like this is my role there. But when I did the prison visit as like a conversation group, I kind of didn't know what to expect, and I'm not the best at like making small talk and stuff. But they were really well facilitated, and they give you discussion questions, so it's pretty easy to go in and just kind of have a good conversation for an hour or so. And it helps that nobody has a phone.
I feel like it's really easy to go anywhere today and not talk to anybody. Like you could just go your whole day and not say a single word. So it's just human connection is, I don't know, it's so rare nowadays, you know what I mean? But you go into a room with people who just honestly want to see another person or have some sort of communication. Prison is very much so, at least the people in there are like, out of sight, out of mind. It's not just said, it feels that way. Even family and friends, it's hard. They got to pay to talk to you. We got to pay for stamps to write people. It's not common. So you have just a group of people just excited to speak to you and just interact, just literal human connection. You're going just to connect, feel human again, talk about any and whatever. These people have gone through everything and been through everything. They might mess around and give you some advice you think you needed. It's a wonderful experience. Sitting on the other side of the table, I'll tell you, like trust me, just go. You won't regret it. It's free therapy, if you will.
I had a question for DT. I was wondering how did the program impact your life after prison?
After prison. Okay. That's a good question. I guess it kind of, in a way, helped me answer a different question, if you will, which was, what was my perspective of education? Right? When I was in school, when I was in high school and everything, I was annoyed by it. Honestly, it was like I didn't want to have to do it all the time. It was overwhelming. It was frustrating. And honestly, I'm sure you guys are probably somewhat thinking that sometimes too, right? You're surrounded by education all the time. If education was water, you'd be drowning in it. You understand? Like, that's crazy. Then my whole life hit the fan, and now I'm in a place where if education was water, I would be dying because it's a desert in there, you understand? Nobody's teaching me anything. Nobody's coming to give me any information. Yeah, it's like a new country when you first land, like Tania was bringing out, where you got to learn how to walk, talk, move, operate. But after that, it's just your mind is just craving, like, how do I feel human? How do I feel like my mind is working? How do I give answers to all these questions in life I feel like I solved? And then you sit down in a class with actual people and people who respect you and want to hear what you have to say. And then you're working with all these guys who you didn't even know were so just wise in their years and who had grown so much through so much adversity. And it just put a whole new perspective on what education was for me, right? So it was no longer just something I was trying to get away from, but now in essence it was something I craved and needed because water ultimately is vital to us, right? We need it to live. And that's what it became for me. So even now, I'm at events like this, getting opportunities to talk to you all, which is fantastic. It's really cold in here, but I love it. It's great to be in this environment and speak to you all and share this experience. It sucks I had to go through what I had to go through to be here. But it's a blessing for me to be here. And Kathie operates, she knows so many people. She's like the coolest person I know, honestly. She knows so many people. And she's just like, she keeps connections with everybody who just before everybody sat in these chairs, she was like, DT, guess what? So-and-so just got out. She keeps up with everybody. Whatever she can do to help and provide, whatever Exchange for Change could do to help and provide, to help these people who get out, because they get to see the humanity of these people as well, right? We write them off as a society because we're like, they did bad, they deserve it. Sometimes it's bigger than that. And to honestly just think they did bad and they deserve it is ignorant. Exchange for Change has been everything for me. I will continue to do whatever I can to help in any capacity. Because even though I was innocent and went through everything, it helped save me. So if I can tell everybody about it, maybe it's not something that was on your radar before today, but I guarantee you won't regret looking into it.
And from a professor's perspective, no offense, but the students inside are amazing. They are so motivated, so talented. And we always joke because a lot of the time we spend workshopping their writing. And we always say, okay, for next class, 5 or 6 people will come in and you'll read what you wrote and we're going to give you feedback on it. And they always start with, well, I'm not really a writer, but let me just share what I
Right, this isn't very good. This is just a draft.
And then all the jaws drop. It's like, it's a good thing you're not a writer because I don't know what feedback I can give you. So, as a teacher, it's been amazing because I agree. I think it's a lot easier not to look that way. And and it's very comforting to think if they're there, it's because they deserve to be there. But once you start doing the work, you realize you've been missing out on so much. And I agree with you. I always feel kind of weird about sharing their stories because it's not my story to tell. But what I'm trying to do now is more share the story of what I'm doing and the people I'm meeting and how I'm trying to give them the tools to share their own stories by publishing on Don't Shake the Spoon, by writing about their own stories. So that's been a really special part of my life, and it's not something that I imagined I would ever do, and it's been sort of the best surprise of my life, really. And I second everything you said about Kathie. I mean, by the way, my dad wants to come to your house to visit because I told him about you. He was asking me if you speak Spanish, and now I know that you do. So.
Is there a question?
Hello. Oh, there it goes. So I was really interested in coming to this talk because I thought that the title was quite interesting for how it was discussed. For me, I've been reading quite a bit about Kevin Rashid Johnson, who is like an organizer who is imprisoned right now, and has been discussing a lot about his experiences, particularly like in solitary confinement, and just like his experiences of how he views like the prison system and how it kind of creates its own kind of culture. And so I wanted to ask in particular why you all, I'm not sure exactly how this process came about, but maybe someone or somehow you guys can talk about this, but the title of letter exchange programs as intercultural learning, because I was quite interested in the fact that it was a very specific point mentioned by particularly Kathie that, oh, it's only 15 minutes away, it's only 30 minutes away. And for that to be an entirely different culture that requires intercultural exchange, or maybe the intercultural exchange is something different that I'm not quite understanding, but maybe you all can talk more about how imprisonment can create that difference in culture and create that difference in understanding.
So I can start with the name of the organization, because when we came up with Exchange for Change, it was this idea that students on the outside would exchange letters with people on the inside, as one of our classes. Just for perspective, we're currently teaching 26 classes in, I think, 8 institutions, right? So we've grown tremendously. We were 33 before the pandemic, and we're not back up to that yet, but we've reached about 2,000 students, and we've somewhere around 100, 120 facilitators have been trained, right? So the network of people who have been impacted by this, but specifically this idea of the inside and the outside. But what we saw happening, like almost immediately, was the exchange that was happening within the classroom. So we had gang members from rival gangs that would come and start to discuss literature. And that would spill out onto the compound. And one of the things we have had to respond to a lot is, you know, who are your students and why, like, do you have any criteria for teaching? So we have no criteria except an interest in learning. So as a result of that, you get people with a lot of education or people who just got their GED, but you also have people with life sentences, and you have people who are getting out, just got out, right? When they ask, why would you teach someone who has a life sentence? They're not going anywhere. And DT can probably talk about this. We have taught people to fall in love with education. And when you fall in love with education, then you can go back out onto the compound and reach people that otherwise you might not have anything in common with, who then understand that maybe the education they had on the outside before they came into prison isn't the only way to do this. So the exchange was also happening within the classroom. And I think, I can't tell you what the impact is, but I can tell you visually what I see. I mean, everybody takes their own story back out onto the compound, or students here who have been involved in the exchanges reach a network that I'm unaware of, but I know that it's happening because here we are at FIU talking to people that are interested in learning. And so that, in my mind, that's already sort of spreading the word to different people that we wouldn't otherwise reach. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's kind of my thinking.
I can answer a bit in terms of the letter exchange itself, because I was a letter exchange student. So my class had 5 letter exchanges, so I wrote 5 letters and I received 5 letters. And you would think, oh, that's not that many letters at all. But in fact, I realized after the exchange that each letter was way longer than a page. And I know that that varied in my class. There were people who didn't have that length of a letter. But the impact with every single person in the class, we didn't trade letters, right? So I didn't read another student's letter unless they wanted me to, or vice versa. But we don't write anymore. You know, we don't write longhand anymore. Even those of us who do in the writing program, we always type everything in the computer. And there were people who were sharing pictures. There were people who were comparing handwriting. There was sort of this, also on the surface, distinction between us university students and students who are in prison. And we actually realized together as a class that we're not different at all, but there are clear differences, right? It's a dichotomy, and it's a balance. But at the end, most of us realize that we learn more as university students, and we were being supported more as university students than they were inside. And that was really revealing to me. That showcased a lot.
I feel like it's first of all, prison culture is, if I could honestly, like, socially speaking, it's like 20 years behind on a lot of the ways they view things and look at things and how things should be handled. When I first got there, it was like, man, this feels wrong to do, or that we shouldn't view him like that. That's incorrect. And it's like, no, you got to do it like this. If you don't do it like this, other people look at you crazy. And that's ultimately just what it is, unfortunately. But it's, the way it operates is we can't help our families physically, right? And so a lot of inmates, if you will, learn to do things emotionally. They learn, and they had all this time with themselves. They just kind of learned to work these things out emotionally, because as far as they're concerned, the only way they can help their family at this point forward, I can't protect you physically, but maybe I can build you up emotionally. Maybe I can give you the advice you need at the proper time. And so it becomes a thing where, like, through this exchange, if you will, where we get all this social information and everything that's happening with you guys here on the outside, we try to give all this emotional information and everything that can happen. At least that was the connection between families that I've seen. But it also helps in those writings that you see. I think I was talking to somebody the other day, like how like the best songs are the sad ones, right? Are the ones that talk about love and loss in some weird way, and people just get so, it's like when people are so in touch with their emotions, it's like, oh man, this song hits me so deep. It's the same sort of concept. They speak to you emotionally. They speak to you from their heart. They're so open-hearted about what they're talking about. They learn how to traverse these emotions within themselves, and so when they put it on the page, it's like, how did you even look at it like that? And then they're just excited to hear anything that's going on out here. So it's like a nice little blend, and in some ways there are things about prison, well, not some ways, a lot of things about prison I don't agree with. But there's also some things where if you ever gone to a friend's house who is maybe of a different culture and you're like, oh man, I love the way you guys are just so loving, or you guys are just so, there's certain aspects about the way people view life incarcerated that's just like, I like this ideology. I like the way you think. I'm going to take this with me out here because it's going to help me keep moving forward and help change my perspective on how I handle things in life.
I was chatting with Gissell about this other day, and it's a question I've been grappling with. Could y'all give your perspective on these types of programs functioning as positive PR for prisons, and your thoughts on reform versus abolition?
Okay, so something that what we were talking about, right, was as much as we want to support Exchange for Change, as much as we would like to think that we work independently, everything that we contribute, right, as facilitators, as letter exchange partners, when we go in, it in a way sort of does help the system, right? It helps, because at the end of the day, okay, so as institutions, right, we have two institutions. We have FIU and we have the prison system. And I don't want to say that I go in there and I help students, right, or none of us. I don't think that's what we're trying to do, right, because it's twofold. It's at least for me, I do it because it helps me become a better person, right? But everything I do for Exchange for Change also does boast FIU, right? As an institution, it puts us on the map because we are working with community partners. And the same thing works with the students on the inside, right? If Exchange for Change helps lower the recidivism rate, then the person who gets credited for that partly is Exchange for Change, but majority is the institution of prison. So that's always something that we have to be conscious of as well, right? How are we portraying these institutions? And how is it that these institutions are being bolstered by our participation in these types of programs?
So it's a question I grapple with, and I'm going to backtrack for a second. So I used to be a journalist, and I was mostly a print journalist. And I went to Haiti in 2010 after the really big earthquake, and I went down with a major television station company, media company. And they asked me to stay on for 6 months afterwards. And I hated what they did on television. And I said no, and then I got a rather strong talking to from some people who work for the media company, and they said, better somebody like you who can't stand what we do, who will give a better perspective of what's happening on the ground as opposed to responding to what they tell you to do out of New York. And so I lasted 6 months, but, and that was enough. But I think a lot about my decision to work inside the prison. If we believe that education is a human right and we don't go in and provide that, who will? Because the only thing that the state of Florida is required to provide is a general education degree. So as an organization, when we started to come up with what our mission was, we thought, let's not replicate something they're already required to do. Let's offer them something else. So I am literally reduced to like an elementary school person when I go inside there, and the wardens walk by, and I'm constantly terrified I'm going to be called to the principal's office and kicked out. And it has happened, right? So I am aware that we are working in an environment that pretends that they welcome us, but really would probably prefer that we're not there. But the satisfaction I get from seeing the impact that we have on our students is enough for me to sort of make that shift in my mind that we're doing more good than we are harm.
The institutions, they'll proudly say, oh yeah, we have Exchange for Change working with us, we have all these other media companies coming in, and they won't give us any access or make it any easier in the process and getting in there and helping people, but you better believe they'll put it on the website and say that they support it fully. So it's, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword, man. It's like, it sucks that that's what they're going to say, but our mission isn't to let everybody know, hey, Exchange for Change did this. The mission is to provide the education.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, I think also, like, I definitely, I think about that question a lot, right? Is this, am I complicit? Is this supporting? But I think kind of like, to go along with what Kathie said, it's there, and in the most immediate sense, it's there right now, today. So if someone, having the training that I have as a teacher here, I can go and help individual people there, and that doesn't exclude other sort of larger initiatives, right? Or like the larger goal of abolition, like you mentioned. I think also for me, like knowing that some fragment of my tax dollars are paying for this, I kind of feel entitled to go see it, and to have, like, if my money is supporting it in one way, then I can go there as a teacher and have a different effect on it, rather than just like handing over a couple dollars and saying like, here, like, go do the thing. So to me, that's kind of how I square myself with it, I guess.
I'd like to share something that I had written and I didn't read because, but just like you're comparing it to your experience in Haiti, being on the ground, I keep looking back at my experience living in Cuba and being on the other side of the embargo, right? And a lot of people in Miami will say, yes, we need to have the embargo because every dollar that you're spending in Cuba is going to the government and it's perpetuating oppression and it's perpetuating the one-party political system. But what I wrote was, I am a Cuban exile, and that's relevant to why I'm here today. I know what it's like to live in a prison state. I know what it's like to feel isolated from the world, and then someone from the outside comes to visit, and you ask questions, and questions, and more questions, and you feel your hunger for freedom and knowledge subside, and the person leaves, and the cycle repeats itself if you're lucky. When I got to the U.S., I was detained for 3 days. I came illegally. And I thought the prison conditions were excellent compared to the living conditions in Cuba, of course. Then I was for several years undocumented and lived with the lingering fear of getting in trouble. I didn't even want to get a parking ticket because everybody around me was saying, don't get a parking ticket, don't get in trouble because then you're never going to get your citizenship. You're going to get blacklisted. Then things got better. I eventually became a citizen, finished my college degree, and then found myself sitting in a classroom inside a women's prison, and now I'm here. How is a letter exchange an intercultural learning experience? Visiting a prison is like visiting a blacklisted foreign country. We have to get a visa. We have to get a PIN number, background checks. Pretty soon we might have to get vaccinations, I don't know. They'll come up with something else. And we have to agree to follow their rules. We are complicit in oppression that way. But even though there's limited freedom of speech and new linguistic codes that are interesting and amazing, new language, uniforms, no physical contact, no hugs, no kissing, no handshakes, I feel that their lives are better because we are there. And that we can make a difference if we all show up. Imagine if we had hundreds of volunteers visiting prisons every day. Hundreds of programs like this one. It would change. During the Obama administration, things changed for the average person in Cuba. People were living better. People had more information. People had more hope. The government was getting richer, yes. Their grandparents and the 1% was getting richer, but life was better for Cuban people. And with economic freedom, political freedom was starting to follow. People were starting to organize in unions. The taxi drivers were starting to hire attorneys to represent them. And then everything got cut down again. And back to economic crisis, crackdown, oppression, everybody in jail for opposition to the government. So that's my view of it. That if we can drop one drop of water in that tank, it's better than doing nothing.
I want to jump into one more thing that to piggyback on what Tania said, and Brenna, we've talked about this. There's a system of prisons that started in Brazil that are 50 years old, and it's called the Association for the Protection and Advancement of the Convicted, APAC. And these are prisons with no walls, no bars, no officers, no wardens, no guns, no weapons, run entirely by volunteers. Hard to imagine, but they have hundreds of them now in Brazil, and I think, like, I don't remember, maybe 12 different countries. We're so far away from that, but it's possible, right? So one step at a time, one volunteer at a time, one session like this, and we've now got 30 or 40 more people that are aware of some of the issues and some of the things that you can do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Noemi. I'm a grad student. I'm one of Gisselle's classmates, and we were actually in the same class where we did a lit exchange. And I found a lot of solace and support in my partner as I was trying to secure my summer internships. And it's crazy to think how they were there for me more than people that I actually knew in real life. And, it kind of saddens me that I can't really talk to them anymore, but I carry their letters with me everywhere. And when I was interning in DC, I brought their papers with me to the Capitol, which I felt was so powerful to feel like they were there with me. But I digress. We absolutely exchanged cultures and so many more things, and it really helped me re-navigate my relationship with my uncle, who's imprisoned also here in Florida, and understand his situation in a more nuanced way. And specifically, because I do a lot of advocacy work and health, I started to look at the intersectionality of prison and health and what that health system or health care looks like in the prisons of Florida, comparing my partner's experience to my uncle's through different interviews and conversations with both of them. And I continued this work and started to post more about how there's a lack of AC in prisons, and it's not at all required by Florida State. And I started to post about this, and I started to get a lot of backlash, and some from a lot of people who I really didn't expect it because they were involved in other organizations and charities and movements that were based around compassion and helping others who are less fortunate than us in some extent. And, I got a lot of that, well, they did something bad, they deserve it. So my question for you guys is, I'm sure you've heard these criticisms and probably grapple with it as you do your very important work. But with your experience at Exchange for Change, how do you navigate those criticisms, which again stem from ignorance in my opinion? And what role do you feel that the program plays in helping prepare imprisoned students to face those criticisms once they are outside?
So my answer to that is twofold. So one, I'm currently doing my master's thesis on the role of compassion in prison. So I think about that all the time. So that's number one, is why should we be compassionate towards people, specifically if they're incarcerated? But number two is, as you were saying, the letter exchange helped you connect with somebody in your personal life who was going through imprisonment. And currently, over 80% of the people in Florida who are serving sentences are not serving life sentences. So if you look at it through like solely a fiscal lens, right, they're going to get out. And if we don't care for them in terms of education, in our sense, but also through other disciplines like health, right, all the issues that they're facing currently in prison, they're going to face it when they're out. And who's going to fund that? It's going to be our tax dollars most of the time. Right? All of these institutions are funded by taxpayers, whether it's health, whether it's trying to find a job, the libraries that they're going to go to try and get their resume up to date. All of those institutions are funded by our tax dollars. So by providing them education before they get out, that reduces our fiscal costs in general.
But I do want to acknowledge, because that's something I've thought about too. I have never had a close experience of, let's say, a relative or a sister who was murdered, right? And I can definitely, if somebody came to me and gave me that criticism as the family member of a victim or a victim of crime, I would just shut up and listen. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a valid argument. So, I mean, I do understand why people might feel that way. One thing that we did in our class when we did the letter exchange, Amadi, if you want to, I know you want to talk about it, but I really want you to. We reflected early on, or we did a quick reflection on what comes to mind when you think of the word prison or prisoner. Just an individual activity, you don't have to share it with anyone. And then the follow-up to that was, now that you've thought about what comes to mind, I want you to think about where that came from. What do you all think came up? Orange is the New Black. Prison Break. The more progressive students, 13th, right? Mercy. But a lot of it was Law and Order, CSI, right? So we came to the realization of how much our constructs of prison and imprisonment are a product of fictionalized works and popular media, right? Popular shows. I guess at your age, you know, for the students' age, Prison Break is something that a lot of you were watching growing up. I'm not sure why. But I think that really helped us. No? Okay. But can you think of other shows that, the 60 Days Inside came up too? Is that what it's called?
Prison TikTok
60
is
days,
also
yeah.
big right now.
Right.
But see, that wasn't a thing in Fall 22. But I think that really helped us understand. And I remember there was a student from Nicaragua, and he's like, but I don't understand because people complain about prisons here. If you could only see the prisons in Nicaragua. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get it. Like, when I got here to Chrome, I was like, this is awesome. Like, my family was like, why isn't she calling? I was like, I'm having a good time. I have cable TV. So it all depends on what you compare it to. But with this student, the conversation became about, okay, but why did you leave Nicaragua? Why did your family leave Nicaragua? We don't want to compare it to what's worse, right? We want to make it better. Because if we're going to use that lens, then we're never going to get anything to be better here. Because here is always going to be better than where we came from.
It's messy.
Yeah.
It's really messy. Right?
And I think it's good to acknowledge that messiness and open the floor to those conversations.
It's about imagining a better future for us, right? Those who are impacted by it, because we are all impacted by the prison system.
When I was first getting my sentence, they sentenced me to 20 years in prison and 20 years of probation, so a 40-year sentence total. What that means is when you go through classification and everything, when you're locked up, they kind of just gauge where they're going to house you and who they're going to house you with. My custody level was through the roof. So all of my roommates were murderers. Everybody I was locked up with had a body or three on them. That's just what it was. When I had my moments when things were difficult for me and hard to go through, it wasn't no officer coming to make me feel better about myself. It was the other boys in blue, if you will, because we all had the same blue uniform. So my bunkie might come down and give me some advice. The dude down the hall might come and give me some advice. Everybody says keep your head up when you're in prison because they understand that, look, regardless of gang status or racial relations, we're all in blue. We're all serving time. I'm not ignorant to the fact that there are people who deserve to be in prison. You understand? But I also know that I did not meet the man that you may have met. The dude you may have met might have been, I don't know, 15 years back. The man I met is this new reformed person. It's this guy who helped me deal with my demons and understand that, man, this is what I'm going through. It's going to get better. All the prison process showed me was that people can change and people do grow. I'm not the dude I was last month. I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you probably look at something you thought when you were 15, like, man, I was tripping as a kid. Like, what was I thinking? That's not the way it worked. People grow, people change. Now, had it been my family member they had taken, I understand. It's much more difficult to accept or forgive. But I also know it's not impossible. And I also know that if you understand that people can change and grow, then it's a reality we have to face. Yes, they did something bad. But are we going to hold them to that for the rest of their life? If you have a child, maybe you sent them in the corner at one point. Did you leave them in there all day? No, you let them out after like 20 minutes or something. Maybe that's too long.
But also you had a conversation with your child once they calm down, right? There's some kind of education process of what you cannot do this, why this behavior is not acceptable, how you take responsibility for your behavior, how you can make amends for your behavior.
And and it's also
And
circumstance.
I think it's really important to know that Florida has some of the harshest sentencing laws in the nation, and we have no parole. So if you committed a crime that is a life sentence, you have no chance of getting out. From an economic standpoint, that makes zero sense. But I have men in my class who have been there 30 and 40 years. We'd never ask why they're there, because that's not our role. Our role is to come in as educators, but when we see the individual, as DT said, it's not the same person at 16, 17, or 18. Just so you know, there's a great episode in the monologue that John Oliver just did about health in prison. So if you're interested in that topic, he nails it. I mean, he's merciless, but he really talks about how bad healthcare is, and it's become, because it's been privatized. It's bad anyway, but.
I was going to say also, in relation to the air conditioning issue, or like what you said, some of the feedback that you got of, oh, they deserve to be there. I think there was one of the events we did at the book fair a couple years back with Angel, one of your board members. So this is previously incarcerated individual who made the point that when he was sentenced, his sentence was that he was sentenced to be isolated from society, right, removed from society. And nowhere in his sentence did it say that he was to be tortured, right? So that, all the other things that come along with that, that was something that kind of hit home for me, right? Is you've been sentenced to be removed or isolated for some reason, but not to be, in a 100-degree box.
So, right, education is a human right, healthcare is a human right. You can't operate in a free world, but we treat animals better than we treat the guys inside, particularly with this heat. No question.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, like none of the places we teach have, like, they don't live in air conditioning, right?
The women.
Or the women have air
The
conditioning.
women have air conditioning, but all the other institutions where we are. And, she's not here. We went into pretrial detention, which is a county facility, last week, and I thought I had seen everything, and I was not prepared for the conditions in our county, to say nothing of our state. Took my breath away.
Our prison systems, I mean, even after justice has been enacted, justice, if you will, has been enacted by the courtroom, there's people still taking it out on you even when you're locked up, officers who still enacting their own right of justice upon you. You know how weird it feels to be told, like, ma'am, I didn't get my food, I didn't get to eat today, can I go out and eat? She's like, no, we already locked up, we're going in the count. I'm like, please, I just want to eat. They say, no, you don't get that right, you shouldn't have did what you did. But to be an innocent man and you tell me I shouldn't did what I did, how do I even, what? It just doesn't make any sense.
That's
So-
another story that we like to tell ourselves, that most of the people belong there. It's just a minority that might be falsely accused and sentenced. But after hearing the stories I've heard, it's the majority.
Sometimes the picture is much
Yeah.
bigger than what we can see.
And in a women's prison, there's so many other issues of domestic violence, of victimization. It's so complicated. You're raising your hand so cute.
No, I
That's
just
the chair of the English
Oh,
department, by the way.
He had a question first. He's over there, already mic'd up, ready to go.
former student of mine, so go for it.
How you doing, Professor? Just a quick. It is a two-parter, but it's not too bad. I wanted to ask, what type of limitations do you guys have in terms of like the material you can use in the classrooms? Like, are there certain books you can't bring out or use as examples? And aside from that as well, the new ruling on the sexual predator sentencing that they just came out with, are you guys teaching people on death row, or are you able to? Is that a thing that you guys do?
So quickly, because I know we're running out of time. So anything that we want to bring in, we need to have a memo for. So we abide by it. Honestly, we abide by it because we are their guests and the program is bigger than the material. I mean, I actually should really say this. We go in and teach, but mostly we show up. And showing up is 90% of the impact of what we do. The second part of your question was,
Death row. Yeah.
So, no, there's no death row facilities in South Florida, but we have quite a number of students who were on death row that got off death row that are in our classes. I would say about half of our students have life sentences.
So there are definitely banned books lists, that you can't bring, and then they always review the books, especially.
Yeah,
But
and
we-
absolutely, there are books that we're not allowed to bring inside.
There's always the knowledge that it could be read, right? Like I bring in handouts with the knowledge that like somebody could, if they wanted to, at the security check-in, read every single page. So that you always just kind of have that in mind in terms of what you bring in.
DT, real quick, I know you brought up food. Do you want to bring up why our publication is called Don't Shake the Spoon?
Okay, so don't shake this. Okay, that's like a prison. It's prison slang. That's what it is. When you're going to get your trays and you're getting your food and stuff, everybody just has they have these properly portioned spoons that they're supposed to give you, which is supposed to be the food that a grown man is supposed to have in a day. It's not. It's all horrible. It's all atrocious and garbage. But they'll come through. But sometimes that garbage be tasting a little like recyclables. Maybe it's better today. So they might come through, and what they do is to spare things out, they make dilute it with as much water as possible, and they'll probably try to give you this portion, but it'll be a small portion. And so you got a lot of dudes that bang on the glass, and they'll tell you, man, hey man, don't shake that spoon, because people pick it up and they shake the spoon to get you the level right, and then they put it on there. So that's where the name comes from.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the way that Exchange for Change also helps to demystify the prison system here in the state. I have formerly incarcerated people in my family, and I think a lot of people who do tend to engage the system through, the family member that's on the inside, and you don't think about the system level. So just the short opportunities I've had to learn about the entire system has changed my thinking. And so I just want to put a plug in, the best advocates for going to a prison visit are sitting here on this panel, but I just want to also say that one thing that you're going to get if you go is an opportunity to see this in context. Because in our society, in this country, we really do keep prisons, at the margins of our thinking, despite the fact that they're engines for all kinds of things. And what you all do is help bring that messiness, as you described, in a way that's a little bit more manageable. You can lean into it a little bit, understand a piece of it, not to mention the interpersonal connections that happen one-on-one level. So I just wanted to speak to the demystification work that is also happening through Exchange for Change.
A warm round of applause for our fantastic panelists. Thank you so much for being here. So out of respect for your time, because I know some of our students kind of schedule us in between classes, it is 1:30, so if you have to leave, by all means, please very quietly go ahead and grab your things, and we will see you hopefully next week. We've got another session next week, Global Migration, Surprising Patterns and Unexpected Motivations. Really, really interesting about how our global system of immigration has kind of evolved. But what I will say is nobody's kicking us out. Right? So if you want to hang out, if you want to, I don't know if our panelists are in a rush to get somewhere else, but if you have any other questions, the conversation is more than welcome to continue, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.